report in Cambridge preserves some of the working class opportunities that were lost because they weren't passed. So, by resisting eviction from his home on Green and Blanche Street, which is now where the hotel is, he, with the generous, expert help of attorney John Mason and his assistant Peg Moll, he was able to prolong the battle with MIT and Forest City, their developer, so that 6 replacement apartments at Pacific and Brookline were built and reserved for affordable housing, and 6 more were financed elsewhere in Cambridge. This helped to mitigate the displacement. Okay. Now, this is at least part of Bill's legacy, and from my perspective, it was a great life. And I celebrate him today, and I'm going to go right to the video, and then people can say what they want to say as you all, again, avail yourself of the food, because when it's hot, it's better. Right? Thank you.
So this is about 7 minutes. I'm going to try to have the volume up as loud as I can. It's basically just Mike talking to the camera. So if you could stand back just a bit, thank you. And we'll see how this goes.
Thank you.
Can you tell me how to play the music?
And I'm here at the corner of my longtime collaborator,
I can hear.
friend, Bill Noble. I want to begin by thanking Gary Quinn, who is making all this possible by creating the video that you're now seeing, since I am unable to make the actual tribute event. One reason for placing ourselves here at the corner of Green and Blanche Streets is to actually mark where Bill Noble lived for decades on the Simplex site. What it says is something I think really important about Bill and the kinds of work, the kinds of things, and the kinds of beliefs and principles that he had. On the one hand, Bill was quite skilled at legal matters, and in particular in an ability to draft zoning petitions. And it was Bill who drafted the neighborhood zoning petition, known as the Clinton petition, which brought forth the neighborhood's priorities for a greater diversity of housing, light industry, as opposed to the industrial, commercial, institutional development which now pervades this entire site in a space that I would describe as incredibly dreary, soulless. But beyond that, I also want to highlight just a few of the things that Bill contributed to the tenant movement, to the struggle for diversity in the city of Cambridge, and for a much more balanced development of the city as it moved forward into the 21st century. And what I wanted to do was note Bill's work in what we call the Cambridge Rent Control Coalition, which was active before the creation of the Cambridge Tenants Union, and which coincided with a lot of the very intense work and intensive work that Bill was doing in and around the Simplex site. Let me just sort of focus on two pieces. The Cambridge Rent Control Coalition had been successful in passing a housing referendum in Cambridge in 1983. From that were possibilities for new legislation. Bill and I collaborated on what became the full occupancy ordinance to keep housing units from being held vacant. That was enacted into law. Bill took the lead in drafting what was one of the first two inclusionary zoning petitions in the city of Cambridge. That petition was defeated when Harvard and MIT joined forces with the Chamber of Commerce to oppose it. Even while Bill was working on these different pieces, he also became active, very much involved in the latter stages of a struggle to determine the fate of an apartment building, rent control building in Harvard Square that we call Craigie Apartments, that everyone I think now knows it as Chapman Arms, Chapman Apartments. Bill joined our four-person negotiating team that attempted to mediate a settlement when the city had to try to circumvent a rent board decision denying Harvard removal permits. Bill and I found ourselves dealing with and in some fundamental way opposing the actions of the Massachusetts Housing Finance Agency, which had allowed for a state subsidy to pay for the work that would be done on the building rather than holding Harvard accountable. And we filed a Freedom of Information request, spent time at MHFA's headquarters reading their materials, certainly to their delight. And finally, as the project was going through, and the city of Cambridge, through its community development department, had signed off on the notion that that one building was a distressed area, even though it's adjacent to what was then the site of the Charles Hotel, which was going up, and adjacent as well to neighborhood 10, the wealthiest neighborhood in the city of Cambridge. Bill drafted the formal complaint we sent to the Attorney General. The Attorney General decided that that office would rather not get involved. But what I wanted to sort of bring through this was some sense of the broad, productive work that Bill did, the collaborative nature of the work, and maybe most important of all, what I think is just the fundamental integrity. Because what we were trying to do, and what Bill was trying to do, was hold everyone responsible, accountable for what they did. Landlords, Harvard, MIT, the city, the state. And I think that just speaks so well for the way he had, in fact, devoted his life to trying to make things better for the less affluent in the city of Cambridge and elsewhere. Thank you.
Sounds the same as always.
So, this is the point at which anybody who wants to speak, and Jeff wants to speak.
I want to say a few words about my friend Bill Noble. Sometimes in life, you have to choose between alternatives that are all unpleasant. The skill is to find the one that is the least devastating. This is hard because so much of the messages that we receive in our consumer society is that there's always an easy solution and a happy ending. It was my great privilege to work with Bill to close our CCC, a nonprofit affordable housing organization in the 1990s. I don't think we could have done it without him. Volunteer work has no boundaries, as a lot of you probably know. When the needs are great and there are just a few board members left. There was no longer any administrative staff, and the agency was in arrears, not only in taxes, but even in its status as a nonprofit. While the management of its properties left a lot to be desired, we were facing a rent strike. There were some tenants that were seeking to privatize the 60 units that our CCC had so brilliantly acquired and was trying to maintain as affordable housing under rent control. It was Bill's superb mastery of all the legal and financial details that allowed us, in the end, to pass on the buildings to Homeowners Rehab and the Cambridge Housing Authority. So that when the agency finally closed, the housing did not fall in the hands of a commercial developer and could at least remain a viable option for the people that had stayed on. It took several years of long and hard work, and I will always be deeply grateful for Bill's leadership in this seemingly endless and thankless task. He was the one who could see how it could be done, and who helped us navigate through these deep and treacherous waters. Had he not been there, the process of transferring those properties in an orderly way would never have taken place. So today, I'm missing him very much. Thank you.
Yes, I do. I have a few words from our colleague Howard Ramser in California, who sends this message, not being able to attend. Bill Noble was a good man, and this world is a grayer and less sane place without him. I met Bill when we both worked with the Cambridge Rent Control Coalition. He was a progressive in thought and action, and put a lot of his time and effort into helping low and moderate income rent control tenants in Cambridge. I knew him as a voice of sanity in the midst of political craziness, as someone with a wry sense of humor, and as someone who was an important part of getting a successful anti-gentrification initiative on the ballot in the mid-1980s. Some said it was the most progressive pro-tenant initiative that passed that year in the United States. He was also thoughtful and noticed other people's contributions. He jokingly said to me after the vote, "There should be a monument raised for you, Howard," saying he was the father of the referendum. Since I wrote the first draft, we both laughed, and it felt good to have my work acknowledged. I miss him and will be at the memorial in spirit. Howard Ramser.
Hello. just want to say a couple of sentences. It is a privilege to be here with all of you to honor Bill and to honor Connie as well. And as I was thinking about why it was such a privilege to see so many of you, I know I don't know every single person, but I know many of you. After hearing Mike Turk's video, it came to me what is so special about Bill and what is so special about, I'm sure all of you, but certainly those of you I know, which is that you are all principled people of integrity. And that is so hard to find in the general way these days. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Neil Rohr. I knew Bill, I knew Bill for a number of years through the 80s and into the early 90s. I worked with him as a member and leader with the Rent Control Coalition and Cambridge Tenant Union, CTU, and while I was a member of the Simplex Steering Committee. And I always liked working with Bill. We had our disagreements, but it was respectful. I wish he had been more radical. He knew I was a socialist, but he accepted it, and we were able to work well together. A few things when I think about Bill, and some of this has been mentioned. A sense of fairness pervaded his approach and his work, and I came to respect that he treated people fairly, and his orientation was that people in our community should be treated fairly. Also, Bill, he really made you think, and you had to be serious about the work. He was prepared at meetings, at one-on-one conversations, and he expected you to be prepared as well, right? And that helped me a whole lot. Bill was very smart, very intelligent, one of the smartest people I've ever met. But he didn't want it, he didn't talk about it, but you knew it by the way he approached the work and the way he did work. I think some people have made reference to that. I appreciated Bill's patience and dedication, and actually one might say masochism, in that some of us know he and Mike Turk every Monday night would be at city council meetings, and they would spend hours. I know. An hour. Because this preceded the time when the first part of the meeting was for the community to speak, say from 5 to 5:30 or 5 to 6. And I could never understand why you're spending so many hours up there. Well, we don't know, something might come up and we need to respond to it and report back to people. Well, we had some disagreements about that, but I did respect that patience and dedication and masochism. And somebody mentioned, and I had written down too, that he showed respect for people even when disagreeing. And we had some pretty heated arguments at tenant union meetings, but he responded to people in a respectful way, and that's very important. The other thing I want to talk about is that when I think about Bill was a mensch. People know what it means to be a mensch?
Yeah.
Well, let me, if you don't, let me tell you what it means. And I think it captures Bill to a great extent. Mensch, this is from the Joys of Yiddish. A human being, an upright, honorable, decent person. Come on, act like a mensch. Someone of consequence, someone to admire and emulate, someone of, not my Connie, noble character. Now there is a real mensch. It is hard to convey the special sense of respect, dignity, approbation that can be conveyed by calling someone a real mensch. The key to being a real mensch is nothing less than character, rectitude, dignity, a sense of what is right, responsible, decorous. Bill was a mensch.
I like Bill, I respected Bill, I admired Bill, and let me add, I was very happy when he hooked up with Connie.
Hi, I'm David Sullivan. I'm one of those people that Bill came to watch every Monday night to make sure we did the right thing. I'm not sure we always did it, but it wasn't Bill's fault. So a couple things. One is, first of all, it's great to see all of you here, and it's great to talk to a lot of people I haven't seen for many years. Many of whom are still fighting the good fight and doing all the good things that you always did. So thank you for that. You know, when I was on the city council, I tried to help the cause of tenant rights, but the thing to keep in mind is you need good elected officials, but you also need people to hold their feet to the fire to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. When Barack Obama left as president, he said the highest office that you could ever hold was the office of citizen, and he's right about that, and we all need to keep that in mind, especially these days, and so I hope you'll all keep doing that. Bill was an amazing guy, and as been observed, he was a very smart guy who was well educated. And something he said to me a long time ago has stuck with me all these years. He and I were fighting with some highfalutin person from Harvard, I don't even remember who it was at the time, who was flaunting his Harvard education, as they have a tendency to do. And Bill said, you know, for people who get a good education, you're supposed to use that to help other people. You're not supposed to use it to help yourself and to make more money. And as I say, that's always stuck with me and has meant a lot to me over the years. So let's remember Bill, and let's remember all the great things that he did. And thank you all for being here.
I have no one else on my list, so if you feel the urge.
There we go.
Ask the lawyer.
I'm John Mason, and I had Bill as a client, which was a real remarkable event. And everybody's talked about how smart Bill is, or was, and all the other qualities that he had. But one of the qualities I don't think folks on this side appreciate is the impact that Bill had on the folks on the other side. Because as a lawyer, I got to talk to the lawyers, and occasionally I got to talk to the principals, and there was just something about Bill, his fearlessness, his brains, his relentlessness. There was something about Bill Noble that really intimidated and scared the people that had all the money and all the power. And when you had Bill on your side, they had a tendency to treat you differently as a lawyer. So I know it's hard to sort of describe that. And you learn a lot from your clients, and especially a client like Bill, who is smarter and tougher than most of the lawyers that you know on either side. And I learned a lot about tactics, I learned a lot about strategy, and I learned a lot about someone who gives so much to this community and never sought anything for himself. But I just wanted to emphasize the impact that Bill had on MIT and on Harvard and all of their lawyers and other developers. And one of the other places that Bill used to haunt, besides the city council, was the rent control board. And I know that the individual members of the rent control board that were landlords or landlord representatives were respectful of Bill, somewhat intimidated, and somewhat awed. So I can say that Bill had an impact on folks that I never saw any other client that I ever had. And he'll be dreadfully missed. And Connie is a saint.
Hi, Carolyn. I'm Connie, and there's some people who don't recognize me. Let me see if I can find it. I have a speech, and I typed it up, but then I kept changing it till this morning. So here's one that says final. I'll try to read my writing here. Okay. Take your time. Okay. Thank you. I have been through a very profound experience as a witness to my partner Bill Noble's illness and death. And this is my testimony to its grandeur, to its awesomeness. I have interpreted my observations of Bill's experiences through the lens of the work of Viktor Frankl, the great Austrian psychiatrist. But to return, diagnosed with a terminal illness, Bill bore his illness with great dignity. I must tell all of you that Bill was aware that he was dying, and that he was aware that he was up against a fated condition, as Frankl would call it. I was a witness to Bill's consciousness of his condition, and I was a witness to the extreme courage and beauty with which he confronted his illness and death. I was a witness to his response to the inevitability of his death and to his choice to transcend psychologically and spiritually his condition. It was as if his death were a kind of epiphany, or in the words of Viktor Frankl, an achievement. Suffering as an achievement and the choice to transcend are both ideas I read about recently in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and I saw them play out in Bill's struggle with his illness and death. At the Bedford VA, where Bill spent the last months of his life, a great drama unfolded. I attempted to catch fleeting images of it with my camera. Some of these photos reflect Bill's amazing transcendence of his otherwise seemingly helpless state. Bill died with tremendous gravitas, transcending the condition of a helpless victim of a dread and fatal disease. It was as if I, in witnessing this event, as a mere conduit, a mere medium, were transported to another and a greater, though mysterious, dimension of existence. It was at once deeply sorrowful and deeply beautiful. In the photos on the first triptych, which are right by my friend Robert Lamothe, who is filming right there, which at some point some of you may be able to glance at. You may notice Bill's face was often turned upwards, as if he were experiencing visions of significance for humanity, a terrible pathos. And the portraits of his face and figure echo, in my opinion, I know this is a little bit, well,
It's okay.
thank you. The doleful expression of suffering and the sad but noble endurance of pain of the prophets as conceived by Michelangelo. A French friend of mine refers to these photos as reflecting Bill's cavalry. Offhand, courage is the word I think of first to describe Bill and Bill's life. Courage permeated his very being and his character throughout his life in every way from start to finish, but he was also a contemplative. Knowing him as I did on the battlefield of life, Bill was a great soldier, but he was also a person of great psychological depth. The idea of the citizen hero from Greek antiquity is a concept I read about recently in Professor Francis J. Ambrosio's book, Philosophy and Religion and the Meaning of Life. It describes Bill exactly. To me personally, Bill was the archetype of the citizen hero, reminiscent of the ideal of Greek philosophy and Roman Stoicism, the longing for justice, the persistent questioner of conventional standards and of conditioned assumptions, the irreverence for power and status. But in my opinion, even few citizen heroes will ever find the courage to take on institutions as Bill did. On the second triptych, presentation board of photos, I have tried to assemble examples of portraits of Bill in this phase of his life. That's also behind Robert Lamothe, the filmer. And you will recognize Bill in those photos. On the third triptych, which is over here, I have brought together photos of Bill and me and friends in pastoral settings. These photos reflect my observation and experience that in the last years of his life, Bill dropped his former reserved character, revealing a more vulnerable person. He became instead very demonstrative and communicated openly in very expressive and spontaneous ways. I refer to Bill's attitude in this phase of his life as the defiant affirmation. In other words, the courage to be affirmative in the face of tragedy, the tragedy of his illness. And speaking of justice, as he was stricken unjustly with an untreatable and fatal disease, I can testify that he never ever lost his personhood. Until the day he died, he was keenly aware of me and my presence, and he addressed me until almost the last day. He was present as a poet is present. He spoke in poetic metaphor. And this is what brings me here to you in Cambridge, to celebrate and honor Bill's life, because crossing over to Cambridge was one of Bill's favorite metaphors during the last few years of his life. Specifically, Bill asked me repeatedly to cross over to Cambridge with him, to the other side, where our hearts are, as he put it. So here we are, we have returned. And I have a PS. Bill lost his intellect that everyone is always raving about, but he gained something else. Neither he nor I could put it into words. It was nonverbal, like music, but it is of immense value. Thank you.
Let's hear it in French. Try to top that.
No, seriously, if anybody else is moved to speak about Bill, that's what we're here for. We have this location, to the generosity of Nabil and Joseph Sater, until 5 o'clock. And Chris Weller, you want to speak?
Very briefly. All I wanted to say is, well, I knew Bill quite a number of years before Connie came along, and through the tent city and through building a model. So I certainly knew him as a smart, guy, but he also was like so hardworking that he never had time for, relationships. And then when Connie came along, it's like he bloomed. That's all I have to say. It was like, incredible. That's it. That's all I have to
say. Just very short. I'm Joanne Preston. I was a foot soldier with the tenants movement for years. And
Try a little louder, please.
okay. At the facing the end of rent control, I called a meeting in the Agassiz neighborhood, and 100 people showed up, and we formed what I consider a pop-up tenants association, the Agassiz Tenants Association, working hard all together with the other tenants groups. At the time that I was living in Cambridge, I was also commuting and teaching at the University of Maine in Portland, and I had a student who wanted to do an internship in the Boston area. So, not surprisingly, she ended up at the CTU office. And just this memory of him coming in and being so kind to me. She didn't really understand the issues, and he came specially before work to get her set up. And I always found him to be not only as brilliant and dedicated, but also his tremendous kindness and caring for everyone. And I don't remember having any disagreements, maybe one slight one, but he was always very respectful of other people's points of view in the tenants movement. And I'm so sorry to miss him.
I don't know if Connie has a picture on any of the boards of the people that worked on the scale, 6 foot by 6 foot scale model of the neighborhood plan for Simplex, right? But most of the people are actually here today.
Yeah, raise your hands if you worked on that model.
Yeah.
Or the plan,
Yeah.
Chris.
Raise it high.
Well, I did.
And Chris Weller.
Yeah.
In fact, we finished, Bill constructed, he worked on the buildings, scale buildings. We built out of clay and also wood and stuff. But he was totally responsible for the frame that would go over the model. Plexiglass thing that would protect this clay and all this stuff. And I remember how careful he was to get it just right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Gary,
Well, I mean, he wanted so much detail in these little things that, you know, if you looked at them from the bird's eye view, 1,000-foot view, you would say, yeah, that's housing, that's a park, that's light industrial, that's a bikeway. But Bill wanted details. He wanted to know if that was a front porch on that triple decker. He wanted to know what kind of activities maybe you could have in that park. Is there a top lot? You know, so on and so forth. And he was meticulous. And this is the thing that I remember most about Bill, is besides his tenacity, is his meticulousness in detail. And somebody said earlier, being prepared. You did not want to go to battle with Bill. And because you started with one hand tied behind your back. Because he was so well prepared in any of the meetings I ever was at with him. In any of the arguments that he made, either with us or against us, because, as was mentioned, he had an opinion, and it didn't always agree with our opinion, and I think that made us stronger as a group. Actually, Bill, I was very surprised when you said he was never a member of the Simplex Steering Committee, because, yeah, he was, sorry.
I agree.
You didn't come to those meetings every week for
That's
years.
smart. Right? He's smarter than the average Simplex committee.
Yeah, well,
Not to come every week for 2 or 3 hours.
what are you saying about the average? Some of us were fairly bright, we like to think.
Not as bright as Bill.
So, and you can say as little or as much as you want, or not. And we could just spend the rest of the time mixing and talking and so on, which I would love to do with all of you. Did you want to say something, Joyce, or just waving to Denise Simmons, who just wants to Oh, okay, Susan. Thank you.
Good. Hi, my name is Susan Hagel, and I knew Bill back in the 1980s when I did think he was part of the Simplex. And I was part of the legal team with John Mason and some others, and just wanted to echo what other people have said, that even though he was personally affected by displacement from Green Street, he always took the high road and was always looking at the big picture. And that was probably at the very beginning of my legal services career, and I learned an incredible amount from him, and then thought all my future clients would be just like him. I really respect, and I was so saddened to hear about what happened, and I had lost touch once they moved to Arlington, but and Arlington now is starting a tenants group, and I thought, oh, that would be great if Bill was around, but so again, I was just very unhappy to hear what happened.
I'm only going to let a certain amount of silence go by before I just let it rip. And you guys just mix. Because if you want to say something and be on film, I guess, too, raise your hand. Joyce. Joyce. You're going to talk from the chair?
Yes. James Kennedy. Preserve always said, once a man, twice a day. And I do a lot of statements because I bring things a lot of things, certain things happen like before I really started doing it. And when you try to remember a lot. And I'm glad that still never stopped in our life. And anytime I have a chance to speak, I speak. Because there's not a public time like we were probably there were too many people, so too many meetings. After the first couple of times, I'm not going to be able to get to these meetings. But I'm so glad that still working across being sorry. Thank you.
Steve Beecham. I wasn't going to say anything, didn't know how to put it, but there's that, some of you may know that Brecht poem where he talks about to fight for an hour is good, to fight for a day is good, but to fight for a lifetime is indispensable. And when people are organizing for housing justice over the years, to remember someone who gave everything he had. Whether you disagree with him or not, he just gave everything he had. That's a profound thing to always recognize and to treasure in all our fallen comrades.
See nobody else? Oh, Lester Lee. You can talk from there or come up here.
Well,
how do you come up here?
Well, I'm not going to speak long.
Because the camera can then get.
Well, I don't want the camera.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Yeah, just
I
camera.
just want to thank Connie for all that she's done. Quite nice, Mike, on always give me an update. When I pass through the city. Thank you. The other thought is, from my collaborators not here, off in France somewhere right now. Mike and I are collaborating on a couple of things. But Mike would also talk about the notion of the linear concept of history. The linear concept of history is that we are constantly moving forward, each and every day. And the idea behind that is that we are continuously improving humanity. That humanity can be improved to create the right conditions. And Bill Noble believed it. And my final thought is tikkun olam. We are here, tikkun olam is the Hebrew expression to improve society. And Bill believed in that too. And that's what we do. And particularly in a time like this, when we know we have a tyrant trying to run the country and destroy everything that we believe in, and has divided us in ways that we could never imagine. Bill Noble said we've got to keep on marching, keep on working to improve the conditions of the country.
There. Yay, Mary.
Well, I've been in Cambridge since 1963. And I came under rent control. Rent control went off, and then it went on again, and then it went on again. And I never met your husband. I don't think I met you, and I don't think I met a lot of people, but I remember the name Neil Rohr, and Mike Turk, and of course Alice Wolf did a lot of work. But I remember the people that came later, because I was very active in an organization which I'm sure that he helped spike up, was the eviction-free zone. And they took on some of the work later. And some of those people are here, like Steve Meacham, Bill Cavellini, where I met, and some of you other people that are here. So the work was carried through, and I'm just disappointed that there seems to be a big void now because we have such the big powers to fight. So, but I want to thank Bill Noble for the work that he set me to go through, your husband, and all the other people that helped me live with rent control, and I'm still here and I'm fighting.
If anybody wants a copy of the Mike Turk video, let me know. I will figure out how to get it. Okay.
Thank you all for coming. And food, lots of food still left. Even though it's probably cooled down a little bit, and it's not ideal according to Nabil, but partake.
No Cavellini's raviolis all gone. Sonia's all gone.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes. Across the river, we can't go in barely going over across the river.
One straw.
Oh, I